Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu. I'm the co-chair of the firm's Technology, Media, and Telecom Industry Group. Today, I'm very pleased to have as my guest Scott Shearman, who's General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at Sensity Systems. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So, Scott, I know you just recently joined this interesting startup after being at eBay for a long time. Tell me a little bit about what Sensity Systems does, and what do you do for them?
Absolutely. So, I was at eBay for 17 years, and many of my colleagues had said that, how are you going to go find another challenge after eBay? You've got payments and e-commerce and tickets and all these Skype. Be difficult to go find a big privacy challenge.
Yep.
Turns out I found one. Sensity Systems is a smart city platform, and what that means is if you think about the platform behind a smartphone, you've got Android or iOS.
Right.
And that platform is really a data gathering platform in the context of the smartphone. It's all of the data from all of the phones that then is positioned into an application layer for developers to create applications that then those phones use.
Right.
A smart city platform is the same type of thing. It's like an Android or an iOS development system and then developer platform, so that all of the data that comes in from sensors throughout cities around the world can be made available to developers to create applications for cities to then be able to leverage those applications. So some applications like smart parking or pothole detection or parking analytics, pedestrian analytics, snow depth detection, traffic collision. You can get the idea from there.
Right.
But the devices, in the context or the analogy of the smartphone, the devices and Sensity's go-to-market strategy is through the LED street light conversion transition that's happening now. So street lights around the world are being converted to LED. And that transition, while some have speculated it'll take the next 10 to 15 years, is actually accelerating faster than people originally thought. The primary reason for that is because the energy savings alone from transitioning to LED light. On average, you can save, even with just a simple transition with no smart lighting application, you can save 50% of your electrical cost. With a smart lighting application, which is one of the first applications that we see people use on the platform, you can save up to 85 and even 90% of your electrical cost, which means the system pays for itself in 18 months or even sometimes if it's an always on light in about a year.
Wow.
So you're now taking a dumb street light and you're turning it into a computer 30 feet up in the sky and now leveraging that as a sensor platform rather than just one device. It's a platform that you can attach multiple sensors, surface that data to application developers, surface those applications to the citizens at large in the community to become a better managed city.
Wow. So it sounds like either a privacy nightmare or tell me about how to even begin to tackle the privacy issues with a system like that.
Sure, exactly. Yeah. Privacy nightmare. You have sensing devices gathering information in all of the world's cities. Boy, who wants that data? Privacy, exciting privacy benefit is working as the Chief Privacy Officer and General Counsel for a startup, where largely the technology is, we would say it's very developed, but in the grand scheme of history, it's still very nascent technology, which means we're in on the ground floor. And so being able to develop privacy controls, develop the technology with privacy and security thoughts from the very beginning is, in many ways, my colleagues look at me and they say, oh my goodness, what a luxury. Not privacy nightmare, privacy benefit, because you don't have to deal with all these legacy issues. You're going to build it from the ground up.
Right.
And obviously, if one has a little hubris, you say you're going to build it from the ground up correctly. So, yeah, pretty exciting.
Well, what are some of the privacy issues? Or, isn't all this data just anonymous data? Or tell me about the actual privacy issues that
And
you're
so,
concerned about.
Great question. The way that we're tackling that question and the product is from an application-based approach. You could tackle it from a hardware perspective But the hardware without an application telling it what to do is a boat anchor. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there. And so with an application-based approach, then that means we're doing personal or privacy impact assessments based on each application.
Mm-hmm.
So you have non-identifiable data that comes from non-identifiable applications. For example, you can have accelerometers in each of the devices, which means as an earthquake moves through a region, you now have very precise shaking measurements that can come from each light pole every 30 feet.
Right.
That's not identifiable information, and therefore you're going to manage that information and make it available to a city or to developers in a very different way than you might identifiable information.
Yep.
Contrast that with the video node or the advanced media node, depending on what our customers, how they brand it differently. But in essence, now you're talking about a device that has two 720p HD cameras. And we're often very critical of how people describe the device, because as soon as someone hears the word camera, they think always recording, always in the optical spectrum, just like I see on TV. A video sensor is a sensor that analyzes what it sees in multiple spectrums, but the visual eye spectrum would be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean it's always recording, and it doesn't mean it's always on.
Interesting.
So applications can use that sensor in different ways. So for example, I can analyze traffic patterns through object recognition and never record anything. The devices are, quad-core ARM processor, incredibly fast, and do all of the video analytic in the device 30 feet up in the air. It doesn't need to record. Just as you look at something and your brain says that's a house, it can look at an object and say that's a bicycle, that's a car, that's a bus, that's a bicycle, that's now two bicycles, there's another car, that's two cars, and you have a traffic analytic application. If you're not recording any of the real raw video and you're just car counting, that's another non-identifiable application. However, you could say, or the city or a developer might say, hey, you know what? There's this street where cars normally park. There's no lines, there's no meters, but wouldn't it be great if people knew if there was an open space? 30% of a city's emissions pollution comes from cars looking for parking.
Wow.
So your smartphone app, says take two rights. There's a spot you can parallel park in on the right. Right? Again, it doesn't need to be identifiable. It's just there's a space. There's two cars that are parked on either side, and there's a space in the middle.
Right.
And a developer could take that a step further, could link it to an online payment provider. A shout out to PayPal because I used to work there. But there's lots of different choices in payments. But so now you're connecting a financial account to a parking spot,
Right.
and could connect a smart payment method for that parking. You could do variable surge pricing. You can do all kinds of different things. Totally up to a city, totally up to a developer on what solutions they want. But once you tie that to an account or to a license plate or to a person, you now have an app that has personally identifiable information.
Right. Interesting. So, so you're doing the smart cities. I mean, are most of the applications that you're looking at, do they involve personally identifiable information, or most of them really don't? Because seems like you've cited some good examples of both.
Yeah. So the primary four applications, or three or four applications that we hear loud and clear that cities want, and if you think of it again in the smartphone analogy, you had your contact address book, you had a camera, and you had one or two other primary applications that came with your first smartphone. And that's how I look at this market, which is there are a few applications that everyone sees as immediate benefit, and then you really start to diverge based on region and size and heading, right? And those initial four are lighting control, so daylight harvesting. So the brighter it gets outside, the dimmer the light gets. It's not just on and off, right? And when it gets to a certain level of darkness, does the light just turn on full bore, or does it slowly turn on? And that's how you get some of those energy savings. You can also do very fine-grained motion detection and therefore light control. So lights can follow you in a parking garage rather than having the whole floor on. It can follow a car or direct a car to an empty parking spot. Lighting control, typically traffic and pedestrian analytics. How many people are in front of this street, in front of crossing this sidewalk, in front of this store. The very valuable data for retail, very valuable data for city planning, for pedestrian fatalities, sidewalk and timing controls.
And again, all that stuff can be done without personally identifiable information.
And all of that can be done simply by analyzing, a blob, a person. And again, if you think about the orientation of the devices from a streetlight, it's a top-down view. And so while you can position license plate recognition cameras to do a cross angle in an intersection, that would be a different sensor that you could add. But the primary video node that I'm talking about is a top-down view, which most of us aren't very identifiable from the top down.
Right.
It's very difficult to do facial recognition. You could do follicle recognition potentially, but not facial recognition from that aspect. So yes, the pedestrian analytics is a non-identifiable application. The lighting control is a non-identifiable application. The next app that we hear a lot of interest in and have some deployments on is the smart parking. And there it's just parking availability. And I would anticipate that as we move through some of these trials that we'll see them want to connect it then to payment or enforcement.
Right.
But at this point in time, it's just parking availability. And if you think about even the next step of enforcement, today we see, we call them meter maids, but the parking enforcement vehicles, whether they're walking or biking or in a little buggy, and they put chalk on a tire and then they come back an hour later. Well, okay, you now just have a system that you have an app you have an iPad in your lap, and it tells you go to this car. It's been there an hour and a half. Right, so it's immediately more efficient without even being identifiable.
Right.
In that sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the last application of the four initial ones that we really see cities implementing is a connection to their existing safety and security systems. And so many people say, oh my goodness, you're putting cameras around the world. No, cameras already exist around the world. People call out London as the big example, but most major cities have a major safety and surveillance network in place. Those networks, unfortunately, are based on old technology that is, in many cases, 365, 24/7 record.
Right.
It's all backhauled to a central VMS, video management system, and you have either teams or you don't have teams of people looking at live feeds. Now, what that means, pro and con, is that you've captured a lot of information so that if you need to go back to analyze an event that you are now aware of, you've captured a lot. You can probably go back and recreate or see if you've caught the right footage.
Right.
The downside is there's no proactiveness to that type of a solution, and it's incredibly privacy invasive in the sense that you're capturing life 365, 24/7.
Right.
The good news is, though, that it's really not that generally available. And so the availability of it, well, you could say, well, your privacy is protected because there's so much data and it's really not being reviewed and it's really not all that accessible. And so it's kind of obscure. Right?
So how are you solving that, or why are you handling that with the surveillance thing?
Our connection to the safety and surveillance application is very different in the sense that we offer, as I had talked about earlier, the opportunity. We built some technology from the ground up, thinking about privacy, thinking about security. And so one of the key differentiators of a Sensity system is the bandwidth of the network. And so if you think about each of these streetlights being networked, but also each of these streetlights being a computer, they analyze at each device. They don't backhaul everything to central command where it's stored forever. the app has the ability to detect a suspicious package if that's one of the apps you want, or to record an event, a group of people at 11:30 at night congregating in a way that looks like a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And just like if you tag an event on a point of view camera that you might have for mountain biking, you hit tag and it goes back 5 minutes and forward 5 minutes, records you hitting the jump and crashing. And you watch that later and laugh with your buddies. The same type of thing, but it's all based on video analytics. It can happen. So it's observing, and then it observes something that triggers the analytic.
Right.
And that analytic could say, roll police, suspicious activity, and it sends a text message to the police, or gives them an alert through dispatch. Or it says, record and throw into a queue to be reviewed. So now you have an opportunity. You're not recording
24/7.
24/7, 365.
Interesting.
You're minimizing the amount of data that you're collecting, and of course, in privacy circles, data minimization is a fantastic approach, right? The second thing that it does is each of those devices, and this is more of a security piece, is each of those devices is processing and storing at the edge rather than backhauling everything. And so now you have a distributed security architecture, which is much safer because if I crack into the old command and control system, I have everything.
Right.
If I shimmy up a pole and steal that device, well, one, it bricks and you've got nothing. But otherwise, if I find a way to connect into any one of these,
you've got just that one node.
I have that one node.
Right. So does that mean each one of these devices has local storage right there? That's the idea?
Each one of these devices has local storage, and that's configurable based on the customer, the city, or one of our. We have the largest mall owner in the United States is another customer, and so on and so forth. But they get to decide what their data retention policy is.
I see. Interesting.
And so again, rather than 24/7, 365 forever.
Right.
What we, out of the box default, again, some of the privacy by design pieces, is it's 30 days. If you want something more than 30 days, you need, again, part of an app to tell it to move it through the network down into command center, your VMS or whatever it might be, so that you can capture, retain, and store that for a longer period of time. So it's not the always on, and it's not the store forever. It's on when you want it to be on, and store it for as long as you tell it to store it.
Well, it sounds like the technology has really advanced to a point now where it can really allow you to really minimize the amount of personally identifiable data collection. I mean, that seems like one really good thing that the technology kind of allows you to do, because now you're saying you don't have to record 24/7 anymore. You can do, instantaneous looking for very finite, discrete events.
Yes. No, and that's absolutely right. I think that the challenge with that, of course, is we can build it, but that's not what people are used to, right? When I was at eBay, I would talk with our anti-fraud team, and I'd say, "Hey, do you really need this data?" And they said, "Well, we won't know that we don't need it until something happens and we analyze, and it turns out then we didn't need it, right? So we need everything until we know we don't need everything." So there is a lot of training and education of city CIOs, of city CTOs, of the customer, so that they can become comfortable with, they can let go a little and trust in technology, that they don't need to record everything. And that is so they wouldn't need to be there if we didn't have the technology offering.
Right.
We have the technology offering. Now we need to get them comfortable that they don't need to store and record and store everything. And so in that line, what Sensity is working on is a smart cities best practice for privacy and information security, so that they can think through, so that the CIO, the customer, can think through, how long should I store this? What other reasons might I have to store this? Are there legal requirements to store these things? If I don't need it, then how soon should I get rid of it? Those types of questions. And the reception has been fantastic. I've worked with a number of CIOs in some of the largest cities in the U.S. to date, as well as actually a city in Copenhagen as well as in Adelaide, Australia. And the reaction is at first, does it really work? But then second, oh, wait a minute, I can implement this technology, and I'm telling my community that I'm not spying on them, and that this is to make the city a more efficient and better run place with less traffic, both pedestrian as well as automotive, and offering these benefits. Well, none of that does me any good if I get crucified in the press from a privacy angle. Mm-hmm. Now I have the controls that I can talk about so that people understand that this system is being thought about appropriately, and since I'm an elected official, that means I get to keep my job.
What is the general response difference between European cities and U.S. cities? I mean, given that Europeans have a much more sensitive, flavor of privacy, and the whole, there's a much stronger ethos of fundamental right of privacy.
Yeah.
What is your experience with that? I'm curious to know what the response difference has been generally.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because the immediate reaction, and of course, so I joined Sensity and I immediately contacted my friends at the FTC and different data protection agencies that I've worked with for many, many years, because I wanted to do a little show and tell on the technology and get their reactions.
Yep.
and let them know how we were going to work through these issues. And I won't name names, but I did meet with a number of European data protection officials, and they were simply aghast. The immediate reaction was, you can't do this, right? I mean, nice job selection, but you're going to be out of a job because you can't sell this. And then as we walked through, who buys this, right? This isn't a private company buying this to deploy it in Europe. This is a city in Europe in consultation with the city's police and mayor and other infrastructure providers that need this technology to provide the critical infrastructure services for their city. Light bulb starts to go off. And, well, where's the data stored? Well, we already covered that. 30 feet up in your city, right? It's not stored in the United States. It's not stored.
Right,
it's stored 30 feet up on a light pole in your city.
Right.
And, okay, well, what personally identifiable information is being collected? It's an application-based approach. And would a citizen have knowledge? Well, sure, because they're going to download an application for smart parking. Right. And now you have your opportunity for notice and awareness and transparency consent and all these different things. And so walking them through the technology, after seeing their reaction, heartbeat elevated, walking them through the technology.
They actually got comfortable.
They understood it. Right now we have a pilot in Copenhagen, and it's wonderful because in Dahl, it's the Danish Outdoor Lighting Lab, they demonstrate all kinds of new technologies. And that's the perfect place for people, again, to learn, ask questions, understand what it's about, what it isn't about. And the challenges that we've had to face, if you think about Europe in the context of data storage and all those things, are the challenges, particularly for this technology, that we would face in any region of the world. Mm-hmm. If you think about the fact that the cloud computing and the data storage and the backhaul capabilities, if we're doing business in multiple regions around the world with multiple governments in this era of, pick it, Snowden, Schrems, pick your privacy name, countries don't want other countries to have access to what's happening in their country, right, without permission. It may be, in fact, that Copenhagen would love the U.S. Secret Service to help analyze a criminal event that happened that they have data on, but they would like to ask. And so the data needs to be located in the jurisdiction of the customer, and access needs to be controlled and owned by the customer. And so we've built and designed the system so that it meets those principles, because when you're talking about operating we have a pilot that is being deployed in Pennsylvania Avenue on either side of the White House. I'm sure that they don't want to share the same platform as our China joint venture.
What about the reactions of the U.S. cities? Do they get the same elevated heartbeat reaction, or it's different?
That's interesting because my immediate thought was, it's not going to be the same type of reaction. And in some ways that's true. It's not the same type of reaction. But in other ways it is, because as it turns out, as I was referring to earlier, the mayor it's an elected position.
Yeah.
And if they launch something that is perceived by their citizenry as being invasive,
they're gonna
that's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah.
Bob Bennett, the CIO of Kansas City, is a absolute fantastic visionary when it comes to city planning and city management. And in his on his list of accomplishments in his resume, he was in charge of rebuilding Mosul. So he's got some experience in city infrastructure. And one of the criticisms that he's receiving is this, you're exacerbating a digital divide. And then you hear him respond, actually, we're innovating in Kansas City ahead of all these other medium-sized cities on the planet to bridge the digital divide. We're going to put free Wi-Fi on buses, free Wi-Fi on light rail, and the sections and the routes that we're picking are the routes that bridge the digital divide, not exacerbate the digital divide. And we're providing these, pedestrian and city and smart parking infrastructure. We could have just picked singular solutions, which then mean for every new solution, we have to implement a new network and a new platform and a whole new sensor system. No. We're putting in a smart city platform so that we can pay for the infrastructure costs up front and then be able to add applications which can serve a much broader population of the city than if we put in one piece of hardware on one network at a time. And he's just been a fantastic champion, and he's in the middle of launching their pilot in Kansas City right now as we speak.
Sounds like your biggest issue is not so much privacy protection, but educating people or educating the public or whoever your constituency is that privacy is actually not a problem with the technology that you're using. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's right. I mean, people hear, as I began 20 minutes ago, people hear video and they think
exactly.
And they think Big Brother spying.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's absolutely an educational campaign to make sure people understand. And you look at it and you may say, well, how do I know if it's on? How do I know if it's off? Is it recording me? Isn't it recording me? And so not only is it educating the customer on how to use the system, but it's then educating the customer on how to educate the consumer or the citizen on the system. I just saw some live still images in Adelaide, Australia, where the city has wonderful large signage in the pilot area letting people know you're now entering the smart parking demonstration area. So they understand what the system is being used for, what it's not being used for. And then you can scan a QR code and learn more on your phone and all of those types of things. But that's all outreach that then the city has done because we've trained them so that they can then bring that awareness to the people within the city.
Sounds like a dream job for somebody who likes privacy. What keeps you up at night?
Boy, my 3 dogs keep me up at night. What keeps me up at night, I think, is I actually sleep very well. I think in this day and age, as a privacy professional, if you're advising your company that there'll never be a problem, then you have a problem. We have a company that is around 120 people. We have a board that from the very beginning believed that we needed a chief privacy officer, and we've now hired a chief information security officer that reports into me. So we have a company that, albeit small, understands the need, the importance of getting it right from the beginning. And I've worked with them closely. They understand that this isn't a zero-sum game. We will have challenges. We will have problems. But that's why we build out a program. That's why every employee in the company has received privacy training. We just had a new person start on Monday. They received their privacy and security training on Thursday. We're 100% on training. We have mapped all of our controls to policy documents and procedures and standards. And we encourage our partners to do the same. And our partners are multi-billion sized partners, not 120-person startups. So we're trying to be out there doing some thought leadership pieces. And I think all of that, combined with the awareness that the executive team has at the company, allows me to sleep fairly well. We will have problems. I won't sleep well during those problems. But I wouldn't be in this job if I didn't relish those events as well.
Well, Scott, it's been a fascinating conversation. Well, you'll have to come back and tell me. I can't wait for you to come back and tell me about how Sensity Systems is doing in a couple of years from now.
Update 2.0 to come.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
This is Richard Hsu and Scott Shearman. Thanks.